Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was April 29th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt cara companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. So we're looking at three documents today. So, today's episode, I honestly don't know how this is going to be a half hour. I'm really thinking this might go really long. So if you were like, oh, it's just 15 minutes each day, and you get to this episode and you don't have a long time, just, maybe find another moment to listen to this when you have enough time to dig in, because this episode is probably one of the most important ones of the entire season, because we're gonna see the effects of the dramatic event that happened on the evening right around sunset of Sunday, April 28th. The documents we're looking at today are dated Monday, April 29th, but we don't really find out the play-by-play of what happened on Sunday evening until we get to a document that's dated tomorrow, April 30th. But we start to see the effects. And yesterday's document showed no sign that there was any trouble, but today's documents, we're seeing unmistakably the signs of real trouble for Joan. We are seeing what pretty much amounts to a panic state in Joan's register. We don't quite get that sense from what we have in Violant's register, though. So it's really important to note how Violant's register seems to be kind of calm and collected, but the letter that is in Joan's register definitely shows signs of panic. All right. Okay. Oh gosh, what order should we do this? All right, we're going to talk about the documents, and then we're going to have to talk about how history gets made. Every single episode I say this is a podcast about how history gets made, but we're really going to get into how history gets made today, because we're going to talk about these documents, and then we're going to talk about how they were then interpreted by earlier historians. One historian, Josep Roca, from the early 20th century, and then another historian, Rafael Tassisi Marca, in the 1950s. Okay, let's talk about Joan's document first. All right, this document is addressed to 3 different recipients. The letter starts at the very bottom of folio 53R in Register 1751. That register is the secret seal register for Joan. The 3 recipients are somebody who is identified as a bailiff in Xàtiva, the governor of Valencia, and it looks like someone who is in charge in some way of the Muslim Alhama but I'm not quite sure where. It's very difficult to read. So 3 different recipients are getting this letter. The letter starts out, this is at the bottom of folio 53R, Comnos per la necessitat de nostra persona. All right, as we have a necessity of our person. So we've come across this phrase nostra persona before, and this phrase, I was wondering to what extent it would always be referring to like the king himself, like his own body, as opposed to the state. And here we have an instance where it's very clearly like the king himself, his body, is in need of something. Because what comes next is Hayam asi presentement necessari Abrahim moro meche. So there is a doctor, Meche, named Abraham, and he's a Muslim, Moro. And that's the part on folio 53R, and then you turn the page to the verso side, and you see the first line has our anger and indignation if this is not done quickly. So there's like this threat, like you've got to move on this or else you're going to make the king angry. And then the second line has sens tardar, without delay, without being late. And then on the next line, venir a jornades tirado de nuit y de dia, right? Telling him to travel night and day, non-stop. We need this doctor. We need him to be transported without making any pause. Travel night and day to get here. This is the panic, because in no other letter that I have seen has there ever been a summons in which the person is told that you must travel night and day. So they're calling for a doctor in an utter emergency state. And not only that, but the person who has attested to this document in Joan's register, the scribe, is Bartolomeo Sirvent. That is somebody that is Violant's scribe. So we have another crossover moment. This has happened before, but it doesn't happen a lot. We have a moment where Violant's scribe is writing in Joan's register. And in the Latin abbreviation, there's nothing to say that it has been done with Violant. I can't really make out any kind of feminine ending on the word for regis or regina. It doesn't seem to be there. But then there's something else weird, that the Count of Urgell is identified as a consil, the last word in that little probata statement, consil. So there's leaders of the court who are there, and Violant's scribe, for some reason, has been tasked to record this outgoing letter, which has certainly been sent in an emergency state with an utmost urgency to the timeline to get this Muslim doctor transported from Xàtiva, which is in the province of Valencia, to Barcelona. Wow. Why is it that Joan is asking for this particular doctor? How was this particular doctor so famous? Or had he been in Barcelona before? The questions are just so numerous. I don't think we have any answers. I don't think anybody has found out any more information about this Muslim doctor, even whether he arrived. So we'll have to try to spot that in some upcoming documents. But now let's turn to Violant. What is she writing on April 29th? What Violant is writing, we're going to look at two documents. One of them is on folio 7R of Register 2053. And then the other document is on the verso side of that same folio. The one on folio 7R is to the Cardinal of Valencia, so James, the person that she just had thanked the other day for sending along the songbook. She doesn't say anything about the songbook in this letter. She's talking all about the king. Signore mariti e signor nostro molt car. And then the end of line 2. Qui segons sabets longament ha es malalt. Look at that phrase. Who you know has been sick for a long time. Longament. So she is acknowledging that the Cardinal of Valencia is aware of Joan being ill for a long time. We have none of the usual, he's convalescing, he'll be fine soon. There is nothing in here that indicates that. What Violant goes on to say is, please, Cardinal of Valencia, kinsman, arrange it so that all of the churches in your city pray, that they all pray for the health of Dit Signor, the said Lord. Have them all pray that he lives. I mean, she doesn't say that, but that's the meaning. Like, pray for him. He's in trouble, is the clear implication. She has this phrase in, let's see, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tota la court celestial. She needs all of the celestial court to be interceded to on behalf of Joan. We're looking for some divine grace. That right there is 2 lines down from that last one at the end. All right. So, like, 4th from the bottom. Divinal gracia. For what? For plenariamente restituit. For a full restitution. So she's asking the Cardinal of Valencia to pull out all the stops to get people praying. But that's not the only person that she asks to pray. Turning the page to folio 7V, she writes a letter that gets copied and sent to multiple monasteries. And in this letter, she says that Joan has been for a long time. Okay, she uses the same phrase in line 2 of this letter to the monasteries. Qui segons sabets. So that they know. You have known. De long temps. And then after that, it's a little bit hard to read. The paleography is a little bit tough here. It's something like, what is that word? Oh my gosh. It's a tough word to figure out, but what comes after that is es malalt. So something like he has been. She doesn't use the same ha s, something else. But the sense is the same. He's been sick not just for a week, but for a long time before this. And now we need you to pray. And we need you to invoke whatever kind of divine power you have, whatever connections, all you monks out there. You gotta do some intercession. Now, I use that phrase because you have to realize that in the Middle Ages, intercession was a real thing. So the idea that you could somehow get some kind of contact into the divine, this was one that was widely believed. And this is the explanation for the relics. So if you had a part of a bone from a saint and you had it near you, if you held it in your hand, it could be used as a pathway to get you closer to the divine. It would be a way to get intercession carried out so that your prayers would more likely be met with success and fulfilled. And so when Violant is asking the Cardinal of Valencia to have all of the churches pray, and when she writes to all these monasteries, all these holy people that have devoted their whole existence to being connected with the divine, she tells them, pray for the king, pray for Signor Nostro molt car. What she's saying is not just like, we'll all feel better if people are praying. Like, that's how we think of it in our modern time. Thoughts and prayers. No, this was believed to have real effect. That if you get all the very holy, devout people in the realm to say prayers, you really are going to influence what happens next. It's not like a way to guarantee any outcome, but it's certainly something that has a real impact as far as Violant is concerned. So this letter to the monasteries is one that Dawn Bratch Prince cited in one of her articles. But then the letter about the Muslim doctor, that one was cited by Josep Roca in his book about Joan, published in 1929. So we're going to shift now from looking at the letters, the documents themselves, to talking about the secondary literature. Because earlier in the podcast, I said that I had been confused about when Joan had this near-death experience. Because it seemed like in January, when he wanted to go to Barcelona but he could not, that was an indication of a rather serious health condition. And I had read in the book about Joan, a biography written by Rafael Tassisi Marca, that Joan had been given last rites really early in his reign. Now, Tassisi Marca never specified a date, but he writes about this on page 144 and 145, and then right afterward, after he talks about the near-death experience, he refers to an episode that took place on February 24th or some point, talks about the decision that Joan made to commit the Crown of Aragon to the Avignon papacy during the Great Schism, and that decision happened in February. So when you read Tassis y Marca, it's very clear that Tassis y Marca, is placing Joan's near-death experience before February. And he doesn't talk about a serious near-death illness at any other point in his coverage of the first year of Joan's reign. So if you read Tassis y Marca, you're left with a very clear chronology that Joan had a very near-death experience and he was given last rites sometime before February of 1387. That is wrong. And I figured out how Tassis y Marca made that mistake. So I don't want to malign the work of Raphael Tassis y Marca. He put together a really remarkable biography of Joan, and he was working from somebody. The previous person, Josep Roca, is not an easy historian to work with. So I don't want to say that Tassis y Marca should not be trusted, but he has made a mistake here. And other historians have used Tassis y Marca as the basis for their writing about Joan. And so the mistake has been replicated, and there's a lot of confusion in the secondary literature that I am now going to clear up. The reason that Tassis y Marca puts Joan's near-death experience before February of 1387 is because Josep Roca's writing style is a little bit difficult to follow. So on page, 222 and 223 in Josep Roca's book on Joan. Oh, actually, sorry, it starts on page 221. On page 221, Roca lists several illnesses, documents that relate to Joan's illnesses that occurred before 1387. And the chronology is really not clear. Josep Roca decided to write a thematic book about Joan. He does not go in chronological order, chapter by chapter. Each chapter of that book is on a different theme. So there's one chapter about Joan's marriages. There's another chapter that Roca calls Joan's superstitions. And so he's kind of telling the story, the whole kind of beginning to end in each chapter according to the particular theme. And within each chapter, he's mushing together different citations from different registers without identifying what year those registers are from. So, for example, on page 221, Roca lists several of Joan's illnesses before 1387. And what is good about Roca is that he does cite the register and the folio. So you can actually go back and look. I'm not sure that Raphael Tassis y Marca looked at the archival documents very much. I think he was essentially taking what Roca did and possibly combining it with Zorita and just creating a more narrative, biographical treatment of Joan in chronological order, which was needed. I mean, there had not been a biography of Joan that was in chronological order, that kind of flowed according to the order of time. Roca's thing is just like, it's just a very messy read, is what I'll say. In terms of its narrative, in terms of its scholarship, Roca does great. He puts in all of these quotes from the archival documents, and you can go back into Pares and find exactly what Roca was looking at. And let's see what happens when we do that for page 221 of Roca. He's talking about all these illnesses that Joan had. He has all these quotes from different registers. He has a quote from register 1657. That year was 1379. He has a quote from register 1658. That register goes from 1379 to 1380. He has a quote from register 1743. The dates on that are 1375 to 1377. He has a quote from register 1744. The dates on that, 1377 to 1378. And then he has a quote from register 1251, which is earlier. That one is from the year 1375 to 1376. So his method, which is not one that we would really do today, but was something that was useful and acceptable in 1929 when Roca was writing. His method was to collect all these source quotes and then organize them according to theme, and it wasn't terribly important that he offered a clear chronology or put them even in chronological order. Now, he does say on page 221 that when Joan had begun his reign, he had a serious illness. But then there's a paragraph break. And then he says, Feia poc cahavia herededa la corona del seu pare y tot just restablert. He then had another illness. Okay, if you're looking at that page kind of fast, it's easy for you to then see what comes next as talking about the exact same time period. So the very beginning of his reign, and then Feia poc cahavia hereded. So right after he had inherited the crown from his father, and then there's that tiny little phrase, tot just reestablert, just as he had reestablished, recovered. So what Roca is seeing is that there was an illness in January, and then Joan recovered from that illness, and then he got sick again, and then Roca quotes from Register 2053, which we'll look at tomorrow, the April 30th letter, and then Roca also quotes from the document in Joan's register that we looked at today about summoning the Muslim doctor. And that's on the next page. So when Rafael Tassis y Marca, whose mission was to take all this chronologically jumbled up stuff that Roca had done and to put it into a life story of Joan in chronological order, when he was looking at that page, he made the mistake of compressing the two episodes into one because it could be read that way. That's the thing about the way that Josep Roca wrote this page. you could read it as basically repeating the whole, like, at the beginning of his reign, and then just as he recovered, he got sick again. You could read that all as just happening within the same week. Roca doesn't say that it was months later that he had the near-death experience. But when you look at the archival record, as I am doing, it becomes clear that the near-death moment occurs on the evening of April 28th. Why is it so clear? It's because of what Violant wrote on April 30th. So you're going to have to tune in tomorrow. All right, I'll give you a little bit about that. Little preview of tomorrow's episode. Violant, on April 30th, she writes to the ambassadors in Avignon, and I don't know why they're the ones that get this info. Just that is a big mystery to me. Why is she writing this to them? Why did they have to know and not somebody else? If it were me, I would write the play-by-play account to someone I'm closest with, like, my parents. But Violant doesn't send the letter to her parents. She sends this play-by-play account of what happened to the ambassadors. Okay, now that I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, well, maybe the information could be used to show that God's favor had been granted to Joan because he survived. And it could kind of give additional oomph to their negotiations in Avignon. Gosh, that's calculated. Oh my gosh. If that's what she was doing, then that's... ooh. I mean, with all of the turmoil that must have come from almost having Joan dead, to thinking, okay, or maybe it wasn't strategic at all. Maybe it's an instinct. It's like, if you are in the mindset of like really believing that God intervenes, and like you wrote to all these monasteries and then Joan survives, shouldn't the Pope know? I mean, yeah, if you're looking at it that way, like the Pope has to know that God wanted Joan to live. So maybe that's why it goes to the ambassadors, the play-by-play. Oh my gosh, I just digressed there. Okay. All right. Here we go. This is the point I'm trying to make. On April 30th, Violant does a play-by-play account of what happened. And it is super clear that the date was the evening of April 28th. And all the stuff that Tassis y Marca writes about, and in his book, all happens before February, all that stuff, he quotes the stuff from Roca. You can see where he got his source quotes. It's all the stuff that Roca quoted. Rafael Tassis y Marca doesn't have anything in pages 144 to 145. He doesn't have anything in terms of primary source quotes that is not also quoted in Roca's book. Okay? If he had one word that had come direct from the archival documents, I would pause and I wouldn't be so sure. But because every single primary source quote in those pages about this incident that Tassis y Marca puts as happening before February, every single quote is from Roca, who is quoting the document that is dated April 30th from Violant. Because of that, I can say for sure that we have a case of a scholar who did hard work and overall has produced a good book on Joan, although it doesn't have any source citations. Rafael Tassis y Marca made an error and had placed this near-death experience in January, but the illness that Joan had that had stopped him from going to Barcelona was serious, but it was not to the extent that he was given last rites. It was probably not a near-death episode, and it is Sunday, April 28th, in the evening, that the near-death episode occurred. So, there's been a lot of secondary literature that's been written based on what Tacis y Marca has related. Tacis y Marca is easier to read than Josep Roca, and even when you look at Josep Roca, it's not contradictory, because Josep Roca doesn't put the dates and the years, things. Sometimes he does, but oftentimes he does not. So it's easy to see how the erroneous information perpetuated itself through the secondary literature. But I am here to say that from now on, if anyone's listening to me, scholars should no longer perpetuate the misread that Rafael Tacis y Marca made of that page in Josep Roca's book. And instead, we have to be very clear about how Joan had a serious illness. It was definitely debilitating in January, and he's probably been lingering with symptoms, but he doesn't really almost die until April 28th, 1387. And we will hear more details about that tomorrow. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.